immediately after having the live stream on. I would like to inform all of you that, as you already know, probably, hopefully, the session with Annemarie MOL will be not only here at Zoom for the conference participants, but also for public. We will go live on stream on the YouTube channel of the Department of Sociology at the Maastricht University. So we will have to wait for a moment until the live stream starts. And then I will welcome also people who will be hopefully watching us online. And I will also inform you that this session will be recorded. So please, those of you who don't want to be visible online, turn off your cameras. But at the same time, as you just heard from Professor Annemarie MOL, our dear guest today, we will very much appreciate if you keep your cameras online so we can enjoy at least the virtual feeling of great community of sociologists we have. So I will just wait for 1 minute to let my colleagues who kindly take care of the technical issues of the conference to let me know. That we are live on stream, online. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Lucia Galchenova-Batista. I'm from the Faculty of Social Studies, Maastricht University in Brno, Czech Republic. Our Department of Sociology is hosting this event. It's a conference of the Czech Sociological Association. We're very happy to meet you today, and I'm really grateful that I can introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Annemarie MOL. Thank you, Professor MOL, for joining us. And I also would like to thank to Michal Sinek, who kindly agreed to chair this opening session. Thank you, Michal, for being with us today. Thanks a lot. I would like to inform you that all the participants here in Zoom that we are going online now. So please, if you don't want to be recorded, turn off your cameras. But if you don't mind, we are really happy to see your faces and see all the people here with us in the virtual environment. I would also like to thank our colleagues from Theresia's organization who provide us with subtitles. For those of you who would like to follow the English subtitles of the session, you're welcome to turn them on. And that's all. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And I would like to give forward to Michal Sinek. Welcome.
Dear Professor MOL, dear members of the Czech Sociological Association, dear conference participants, dear conference live stream viewers, dear colleagues and friends, please let me welcome you all to the first session of this year's Czech Sociological Association's conference. I hope that you are all doing great today, that you had a very nice breakfast, and that you are ready to enjoy a couple of days full of inspiring social science. It is at least a twofold honor for me to chair the first keynote of this year's conference. Firstly, because the organizers of this event have managed to put together one of the most topical, serious, and at the same time entertaining conference programs ever offered in the Czech Republic. The anthropologist Professor Annemarie MOL is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting and most daring social scientists of today. Before I will continue with a short introduction, there is a couple more of technical issues which need to be addressed. As it has been said, we have an audience on a Zoom and we have an audience on a live stream. So if you are on a Zoom and you want to ask a question after the presentation, so you can do it either directly or through the chat. So if you want to put a direct question to Professor Annemarie MOL, please just raise your virtual hand and I will give you I will give you voice, I will give you word. And if you are on a live stream, just write your question into the chat and it will get to me and I will ask the question for you. The talk will last for about 30 to 40 minutes, after which we will have 15 to 20 minutes for the open debate. Because it is certainly much better to hear Annemarie MOL talking than to hear me talking about her. And because she has asked me to keep this introduction as simple as possible without singing too much praise, an impossible task indeed, I will mention just a few of the many issues which interested her throughout her career. In each case, she has left an inerasable mark on the ways these issues are being discussed and dealt with. In her groundbreaking book, The Body Multiple, she took up the problem of perspectivalism in anthropology and the related issue of division of labor between social and natural sciences. On the basis of a detailed ethnography of a medical practice, she has shown that objects of scientific practices, like, for example, atherosclerosis, are not things essentially grounded in nature and then observed from different angles by different expert disciplines, but entities actually made differently and therefore made different through varying practices of diagnosis and treatment. By turning the attention of her readers to multiplicity, the mode of existence in which objects are always more than one and less than many, she opened the most intriguing questions of coherence and ontological politics. How does it happen that things made in so many versions finally come, or sometimes do not come, to form a functional whole? What practices are indispensable for holding things together, and what impacts the objects glued together in a certain ways have on related subjectivities? In a number of subsequent textual interventions, she explored various answers to these questions based on keen observation of practices and attentive listening to the practitioners, from users of a displacement pump used in Africa to bakers and eaters of a clafouti in the Netherlands, while also keeping her eyes open for alternatives. The world as it is, she has reminded us, is not a destiny, and it might be different, perhaps even better, when made differently in practice. Exploring such viable and not only imaginary alternatives subsequently led her, in another remarkable book called The Logic of Care, to formulating a particular caring logic of medical practice, a logic that permeates and often transcends the dominant modern logic of choice. The project of recalling, as she calls it, and challenging the prevailing modes of ordering, which significantly shape action in various scientific disciplines and logics of intervention, while at the same time not being up to the tasks of the present, was also at the root of her two most recent research interests. First, in the almost magical grip that English language has on contemporary scientific literature, which she explores in the recent co-edited volume on other terms, interfering in social science English, as well as in the upcoming book, Eating is the English Word. And secondly, in inspirations that cooking and eating can offer to social theory, which will be the main subject of her today's talk. While along the way, she has managed to shake some of the most secret golden calls of the disciplines into which she has ventured. Her ways of doing so were rather different than those of her forerunners and contemporaries, more additive than critical, rather reparative than paranoid. Her analysis has always been practically useful for a broad range of both scientific and everyday practices, and perhaps most importantly, encouraging for further thinking, debating, and experimenting. Dear Annemarie, I'm extremely curious to hear what are you going to encourage us to think and to do today. Thank you for being with us, and the screen is fully yours now.
Thanks, Mikael. That was a wonderful introduction, though it was neither simple nor modest in praise. Huh? That was it's too difficult to live up to this kind of jubilation, but I'll do my best. Thank you all for having me. And I will share my screen if all goes well and give you a presentation. Is it clear? Do you see it? Excellent. So what I'll present to you today is what I call a taster. I can't resist the eating metaphors sometimes, of the book that has just come out with Duke, Eating in Theory. And I've been working on that book for a long time. The first Dutch published articles with some of the kernel ideas I wrote in 2008, so there is a lot in it. It's fairly dense. And I'll do the impossible thing of present this book to you in half an hour, which is, as I said, it is impossible, but I hope it will all the same be inspiring and give some of you the idea, oh, this is not for me, but others the idea, that might be something in there for me. So see for yourself. Working on this book all that time, I didn't work alone. I had an ERC grant, and that is one of the most wonderful kinds of money one may have. So these people, I will not read all their names, have on and off been working on eating in practice and theory along with me. Now, what is this book about? Its main gist is that it is an interference in pyramids, in thinking, in hierarchical models. So the book is not, it's called Eating, it's about eating, but the point is not to give an empirical description of eating, although there is a lot of fieldwork in it. But the whole point is more to interfere in the models that are embedded in a lot of social science and also humanities and also philosophy thinking. And these models more particularly celebrate what it is to think. And they take eating as something low and they take it for granted. I'll quickly give 3 examples of authors who came up, who used these models, who mobilized these models in the 20th century. My idea is that such models are not just in their books, but their books are an expression of them, and the models linger into all kinds of academic work. The first is Hannah Arendt, who in her book, The Human Condition of the late 1950s, makes a hierarchy of what she calls the human condition. And now I'll read my slide from below to above as the hierarchy goes. Low in the human condition in Arendt's book is what she calls labor, and that is care for food and cleanliness. And she takes that to be boring because it's cyclical. It has to be done again and again. And she points, one of her main intellectual resources in this book is Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher. And she goes along with him that these were the tasks that women, and in the Greek situation, slaves, so captives of wars, were doing. She had a slightly better word, a better appreciation, I should say, for work, what she called work, and that was the making of durable goods. And while labor would immerse the human in labor, making durable goods was a protection against labor, against nature. And this is the task of craftsmen in the Greek situation, in the ancient Greek situation, don't get me wrong. And what she really celebrated and what came on top is the political deliberation of truly creative, there they are, free men. Now, in Greek society, free men were best appreciated, and Arendt went along in that was the part of the human condition to best appreciate. I mean, she didn't think people had, in the present, only free men should engage in action. She wanted to be a free man, so speak, well, though she was a woman. But the hierarchy didn't disappear. This is a classic emancipation model. There is a hierarchy, and women should be allowed to be free men, so to speak, and all people should be free. But then what you do then with that kind of hierarchy is you shift the people, but you keep the hierarchy, you keep the model. So my idea was we shouldn't just shift the hierarchy, we should interfere with the model. Oh, wait a minute, then I did too. Good. Very analogously, Hans Jonas, by the way, was a friend of hers for a long time, but that doesn't matter because the model shifts, doesn't matter for this talk. the model shifts through all kind of work. He wrote not about the human condition, he wrote about the phenomenon of life. So that is, as you can see on the book title, an attempt to give a philosophical grounding of whole of biology. But interestingly, the hierarchy, he again comes up with a pyramid. But the pyramid is, there are different things in it, but it's a very analogous model. So in Jonas' case, what was in the pyramid of life, low was plants. He didn't talk about microbes. At the moment, you would say virus. I mean, nobody would think virus are low, but anyway. Good. Plants, what was very interesting about his approach, though, is that he didn't think of plants as being caught in causal chains. He stressed that they act. And how do they act? By metabolizing. So eating, in that sense, is something that distinguishes life from not life in his rendering. Animals are above plants in that they do not just act, but also have empathy. Like the kind dog knowing when the human is sad, but also empathy towards each other. And their eating is different because they move to eat, because they start by eating plants, and when they eat them, they exhaust them. So an animal is slightly higher. And then in Jonas' rendering, the human is high because the human has moral reasoning and disaspiration. I wrote that. Well, it's also desperation and disaspiration. Now, Merleau-Ponty, who wrote a bit earlier this book, has another substance in his hierarchy, but again, in my eyes, the same model. In his understanding of the human, now we go back to the human again, he focuses on perception. In this particular book that I analyze, I each time try to take one book to be specific and not somebody's whole oeuvre. There's hardly anything in the whole book about either eating or breathing. We have all known as social sciences Merleau-Ponty for bringing the body back into social science, but it's not the body, it's a moving body, because eating and breathing, you can I had a PDF file, so you can look, is there any eating? Hardly. So eating and breathing just appear as mere preconditions for what it is to have and be a body. And what is it to have and be a body? That is that the body can move, that's the step higher, as a whole through the world. And the perceiving, which in his case is the highest kind and the true perceiving, is seeing and hearing about the outside world. Now, I put these hierarchies together here and to show that the same model is at work. Plant, labor, metabolizing, work, animal, moving, action, human, understanding. Now, I don't want to complain about these hierarchies because I understand very well where they come from. So rather than critiquing them, I think it's more interesting to localize them and to see how they made sense, because of course, these people are my ancestors, to put it as an anthropologist would. Why would I critique them? They were not, it's not as if we are clever and they were stupid. They were trying to address a very particular 20th century problem, which is problems of totalitarianism, war, moral collapse that they wanted to avoid to happen that again. And their idea was that that could be done in various ways, moving out of the mind-body dualism, moving out of instrumental and objectifying thinking in dealing with humans. And to celebrate thinking, because the whole idea was all these problems were due to not differentiating man from animals and treating humans as animals, and we had to rise above them. However, at present, although, of course, if you look globally, there is still a lot of authoritarian states and there is a lot of violence going on. So the kind of problems of the 20th century are not over, but we have a few added ones. And crucially among them are ecological concerns. And my idea was, as long as we theorize the human as being above the rest of the world, we cannot address our ecological concerns. To address ecological concerns, we really have to think about humans as part of the world, not as on a par with other creatures. So in taking this pyramid again as inspiration, I thought what might be interesting to try is to shake up the pyramid and really think from eating and not from thinking. So take eating as inspiration and as a model to think with. What we then see is that very quickly, eating isn't cyclical. It's not caught in a cycle. The way we currently orchestrate eating is more about on a global level. And I say we, but of course, the details are very different in different sites. But altogether, there's depletion going on. Eating is very much not natural. We face the question how to cultivate it. And it's also not mere precondition for the rest of life because it's a really difficult and precarious task. So, as I already indicated, my idea is that to interfere with this type of thinking, leveling the pyramid is not enough. So, although a lot of colleagues globally are doing interesting work about interfering with the pyramid by attending, for instance, to how plants not just act, but also know. I thought emancipation is not enough here. And just like in the case of feminism, emancipation is not enough, but it's interesting to transform the terms we think in and to look at let's say, the male-centered character of our terms. It's also look at the human-centered character of the terms, or a particular kind of human. So, and to transform the terms we think in. This is a bit overambitious, but come on, it's a collective task, and I try to make a step in. Yes. So, I will go with you. I mean, this is really a bit of a grandiose book. I'm sorry, but that's how it turned out in all those 10 years because, hey, I wanted to do something wild and wide. So what I did then is tackle a few theoretical terms that are really crucial in all kinds of ways that sort of walk through academic text and academic talks. Being, knowing, doing, and relating. These are also the titles of chapter 2, 3, 4, 5. Being. So I go very quickly with you through all these terms. So we start with being. If you look at the kind of body that we just saw in Merleau-Ponty, which is the body that is really in far largest parts of the social sciences, what emerges when there's talk about the human body, this is what in medical terms you would call a neuromuscular body. So there is the neural system and there is the muscular system. There is this moving. And it's really important, what people like Merleau-Ponty stress, to think of this as an integrated whole surrounded by skin. I mean, of course, eating body is not integrated whole and it's not surrounded by skin. A metabolic body is differentiating all the time. For instance, I have here a little example of a person swallowing water, just as I just was doing to clear my throat. And then it's really important that the water goes to the stomach and not to the lungs. Because if you have water in the lungs, then you get into trouble. And certainly if you have milk in your lungs, I mean, it's all nasty. Lungs have really problem dealing with that, while the stomach is totally geared up to dealing with that. So in a metabolic body, what strikes most is not the integration, but the differentiation. And what strikes most is not that it's surrounded by the skin, but that there's constantly going something in and going something out. There's a persistent exchange of stuff with the surroundings. And if you look at text about being, the kind of way the human gets imagined is as this slightly romantic photo that I show you there. It's a walker in the world, surrounded by the world. Now, the being that you start to model when you attend to eating, is not a body walking through the world, but to put it a bit ironically, what happens in that case is the world moves through the body. I've got here a girl eating a sandwich, so she's eating the bread. The bread was maybe in the photo above, I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's grain growing. So instead of walking through the fields of grain, the grain goes into her body and goes out again. Now, empirically, this is banal, that we all know that is what eating is. But if you think of it as a model for theory of how we understand being differently, then it becomes really unbanal. Then it really starts to shift a lot of things. For instance, the kind of relation that my body, to take that as an arbitrary example, has to the rest of the world is spatially very different. As a walker, I could walk over a path like this person there. But as an eater, I'm not in one place. So I just had coffee with my breakfast. This was from Ethiopia. So there is now a bit of Ethiopian soil helping me to talk. Very interesting. I don't particularly tend to buy apples from New Zealand, but in the shop around the corner, I can buy, especially in this time of the year, I can buy apples from New Zealand. Now that is also really weird, that bits of New Zealand soil are folded into me. The other way around, if I go to the toilet and flush away my excretions, then this can go out and disperse into the sea. So my being, what we see, the model of being that we have here, is that it's spatially complex with outsides folded in across what in biology is called semi-permeable boundaries, because I do not just incorporate into my bloodstream everything that comes through my mouth. And at the same time, this eating body constantly excretes and travels out again. So it's not it's a situated being, but it's not situated in one site. So the kind of topology that you have in moving is very different from the kind of topology you have in eating. Another type of being. So, and as I said, it's especially interesting not just to think about that being in relation to eating, but to really think, what does that mean every time we use the word being or to be, etc., and so on. I told you this is going to be super quick through a whole book, so I jump immediately to knowing. Now, in the Merleau-Ponty type of idea about knowing, and that's an old model, which again is already with us from ancient Greece. There is the whole idea that knowing can only happen from a distance. So there is in theories of how bodies relate to the outside world, there is a difference between perceiving and sensing. So perceiving would be about the outside world, and it can only happen through vision and hearing because they can operate at a distance, while there would be so-called proximate senses, taste, smell, and touch, that are always also about the body itself. And therefore, the idea was they don't give us proper insight in the outside world because the subject and the object mix up. Now, that was said in rather general terms, and that can be interfered with, and it is interfered with in all kinds of literatures from two ways. You can on the one hand say seeing is also what is called subjective. It's also tied to the person and the body. But on the other hand, you can say tasting can also be orchestrated in a way that is really about the object. I have here a photo of a so-called taste boot. And there are all kinds of experimental setups where people are asked to taste, to differentiate between subtle qualities of an object. What does that relate to and depend on? As you see here, a wine taster tries to taste the wine. So he tries, in this case, he tries to make this tasting be about the wine and not about himself. And what is really crucial to that kind of wine tasting is spitting out the wine. I thought this is really interesting because that sort of distinguishes tasting from eating. So what if we look at tasting that is bound up with eating? Now, the photo below is a Dutch cook who was enrolled in programs to try to make children like vegetables. And as a part of that, they were given vegetables to taste in pleasant and fun ways, with the whole idea that that kind of tasting changes the subject and makes them like what they eat. So knowing is there not, while the man above is spitting it out and trying to be objective. In the second tasting case, it's trying to get to know the food and therefore to like it, so that knowing and liking are related. And so the idea is with food, getting to know something gradually increases the appreciation for it. But as most of you know now, no doubt know, at the beginning of a meal, the first few bites tend to taste a lot better than the last few bites. So on the one hand, in the course of a lifetime, getting to know something makes you like it. But every time in a meal, at the end of it, we are no longer hungry, and the appreciation for what you eat gets less. So what you have in eating is a kind of knowing where knowing and appreciating go together, can hardly be disentangled, or there's also in most practices no reason to disentangle them, but where the object and the subject change each other. Because if I eat the apple, there's no more apple. So what we have as lessons for knowing, if we take eating as a model, is a kind of knowing where subject and object get entangled and transform each other. I mean, this photo here is from, by the way, an article we wrote with a few of us about tasting with fingers, where the entanglement was experimentally done in another way, but the relation to the finger in the mouth is still very different than that to the food. Good. On we go. Doing. Now, what is it to do something? There is a lot of laboratory research into eating that researches eating as a causal effect. So and laboratory research, I mean research in a laboratory tradition. And this is what you see there is it doesn't matter what the elements are, but it's the typically type of scheme that causal researchers come up with. What are the causes for instance, people getting obesity? And then they get endless numbers of causes. Interestingly, if you look at public health advice, it is totally different in that is not set up as if how to say that, the world causes us to eat, but we are addressed as people making choices and then encouraged, for instance, to eat the apple and not the pie because the apple is supposed to be healthy. So these are two totally contradictory ways of modeling the causal external causes and the internal choices. And they coexist in a rather bizarre way, I think, in our kinds of societies. And what they both miss out on is another way of addressing the kind of doing in eating, which is eating as a task. I mean, my breakfast this morning did not cause me to eat. I had to prepare it. And other people have done a lot of work for me before it. So I had milk in my coffee. Well, a cow worked on that, and farmers and transporters, and I bought it in a shop and it was packaged. So in daily life, let's say for the women and slaves, for the people who do the labor, in Hannah Arendt's terms, for people who do the labor, eating emerges the kind of doing that is relevant. It's neither causal, it's nor a choice. Well, I can maybe choose whether I drink coffee or tea, but the whole point of relating to food in daily life is not that through, I mean, how to say this? The choice language is imposed on us all the time, but what faces most people is that there is this task of growing, transporting, chopping, cooking, shopping, also chopping, cooking, eating, etc. And the problem with this kind of doing is that there are all kinds of tensions in it. You cannot easily do it right. And that is really crucial also in contradistinction to the kind of concerns of our recent ancestors in relation to the kinds of totalitarianism and murderous regimes of the 20th century. The question was, am I being courageous or am I being a coward? Who has moral courage, who hasn't? The problem with the doings in relation to eating we face at the moment is that they, in very many instances, they're good in one way and bad in another. And eating fish is a good example. When I started this project, there was in the newspaper I read on one day, it was really ironic. There were two scientific results of scientific research. The one was health research, and that had figured out that eating fish is good for one's health. You can imagine the kind of research. The other was from ecological researchers, and they had found out that fishing depletes the oceans. And it's both true. It's both fine. I mean, it's good research. And what does that mean? Is it good to eat fish or is it not good to eat fish? So what we're faced with is, and I can multiply examples of this and so can you. I mean, what we're faced with is these constant coexisting registers of what is good and what isn't good that clash, and that where there are tensions between them that somehow have to be negotiated. So the lessons for doing emerges in life as a task. It's not always caught between evil and moral courage, but what is good to do is torn and in a classic sense tragic. I mean, in a classic Greek tragedy, there were two ways to go and neither of them was good. Relating. The idea of relating to other species in a large part of 19th and 20th century thinking was through kinship. You have this in evolutionary theory. That is a really dominant way of thinking, or it has become a dominant way of thinking about the relation of humans and other species. And as you all know, that came in the 19th century, that emerged with this whole scandal that in kinship terms, the evolutionary theory made monkeys our cousins. So here's the chimpanzee, he is our cousin. If you look at the trees of relatedness in evolutionary theory. So what we were taught to think as relating is that a monkey would be proximate to humans. Now, I've never eaten a monkey. And I mean, it's a sad tragedy in some places, people have to. But in the kind of setting where I live, I eat, for instance, apples. I love apple as an example. So if I think through relating to other species, not through the evolutionary, not through evolutionary theory, but through ecological theory, through eating, my connection is much closer to apples, or to buckwheat, or to coffee, or to other things that I eat. So you get another way of thinking than kinship about the relation between creatures. Now in kinship, that we have the lovely work of Donna Haraway to show that kinship doesn't necessarily mean blood kinship, but it can mean companionship. And companionship, in kinship, you relate through sharing food and to play. But of course, if you share food, how do you relate to the food? You don't share food with your food. So what kind of relation is that? Now, some of us have tried to describe that as mutual care. So I eat the apple, but that means that as a human collective, I don't grow apple trees. I live an urban life, but somebody else grows apple trees for me. And if I eat a lot of apples, more apple trees are being grown. So the complicated relation of humans through food under agricultural circumstances is that we care for the species that we then eat. I mean, there are these anecdotes of outer terrestrials seeing the earth and saying this is inhabited by grasses that have these two-legged creatures to care for them. But of course, under the real circumstances of current eating, this care is not always as kind and mutual as one might wish. I mean, this is a photo of the Amazon where large parts are being where the trees are cut down and the soils are depleted and the forest in a way devolved for pig eating in the global north. So eating calls for a model of mutual care, but that doesn't mean that under the present circumstances that is always what happens. So what is the lesson for relating? That instead of the 19th century call to recognize the similarity with others, and this is also the 20th century call, to in relating, recognize my similarity to the other, that is the call for human relating as well, is to better handling difference from others and dependence on others. So that in relating, rather than, I mean, if I go very quickly, rather than necessarily saying we have all human rights because we all humans are the same, to say, wait a minute, different people live under different circumstances, they need different things. Let's attend to the differences between us and start from there. And that also goes not just that goes both for relations between people and relations between humans and all kinds of other species. So the point of this whole talk, and I'm nearing my end, the point is not that thinking is low. I don't want to, how to say this, put the pyramid upside down. But the point is that a formal trust in what was called rationality is not a good idea. That instead, what we might need to do is substantively be concerned with the precise terms that we think in. So not thinking is good, but the question is, which terms shall we think in? What is the language? What are the models that we think in, and how can we better care for them, or how can we care for them given the circumstances that we're in and given the particular concerns they want to address. So as you saw, what I have on offer here is not a theory of eating, but an attempt to take inspiration from it, and from my side, an attempt to allow you to give you some inspiration. And I hope you have fun with it, and I'm now curious so as to hear your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your really interesting and rich talk. And I think we have now like 15 minutes of the official time allocated to us for the debate. So I would like to ask people on a Zoom to raise your hands, and I will try to give you the chance to ask your questions. And the people on the live stream, please chat your questions to us. So and maybe before the audience settles a bit after the talk, which I really think will resonate through many of the sessions and panels of this conference. And it's really a shame that you cannot take the direct part, that you cannot participate directly in it, but I'm sure that many of these resonances will come back to you one day in one way or the other. But well, before the audience settles and we will collect some questions, I will maybe use my this moment for my own question. I will steal the moment, and my question is actually might be called methodological one, but I think it has a lot to do with the theoretical things you are talking about as well. You mentioned in your new book, in this book you were talking about, but also I think in your in Logic of Care, that you base your analysis and your writing on ethnographical data. That's one thing, so-called ethnographical data, the data collected in a I don't know how to say it, the official research projects, and then on your personal experiences as well. And I think this thing is quite, for me, it's quite a usual way how to go about it. But I think it might sound, quite disturbing to many people in our discipline. So I would like to ask you first how you go practically about it, how you collect these experiences, how you, if you write them down, for example, both these things, and then if this division between personal experience and official projects for you has something to do with the duality of personal and public and eating and thinking with which you want to interfere in this latest book of yours.
Thanks, Mikael. First, I mean, I think one of the strengths of ethnography as a method is that ethnography is, how to say that, it's always in some sense personal, and is always goes through what as an ethnographer one witnesses. And for me, whether I witness myself eating an apple or somebody else isn't that much different. It gives other kind of insights, and it complements each other. And so my so-called personal experience, I don't see all that personal either. I mean, I really think of my own life as in social science terms. It's embedded in all kind of structural arrangements. I'm of a particular generation, etc., and so on. So it's more that I study myself as an object. I mean, it goes both ways. Huh? I study myself as an object, and the practices that I witness that I also use as material, I appreciate as also being personally relevant, so to speak. So this is the question of method, of the ethnographic method, is how to do rigor while also allowing for, how to do rigor without distance. So it resembles a bit the image I showed when we were talking knowing, that I don't think seeing and hearing are necessarily the models for knowing. So I don't think distance is necessarily the model we should have for proper knowing. Knowing can be proximate, just like in the model, seeing, tasting and smelling can offer knowledge to the body. In a similar way, ethnographic methods that are proximate can offer knowledge. The question is how to still make those not about me. I'm not interesting, but I can use myself as a case. So if I talk about, let's say, my eating an apple, that's not about me. It's about using the insights that I gain. And at the same time, what that then requires is not to elevate the I into a sort of general model. I don't think that if I eat an apple, that's the same as if you eat an apple. But I can still use it as a case. So the point is to be always specific, to not generalize. Really, the point is to not generalize. But I shouldn't generalize either if I sit in a clinic and what I see there is not general either. It would be local to the specific clinic in a specific neighborhood, etc., and so on. It's not a really coherent answer, but does it help?
Yeah. Thank you. So you're gonna organize eating seminars now instead of the walking ones.
Well, I don't think so. I think eating, I mean, a lot of us talk through dinners, so that is really nice. But walking and eating are different. So while I've had a walking seminar where we walk together 2 and 2 with colleagues thinking about work, and then we shift whose work we care for, etc., and so on. That works really well. While you eat, you have your mouth full. It goes for other kind of conversations, I think. Good. Anyway, I'll stop because there are 2 questions, so I'm curious what they are.
Thank you. Well, so we have a couple of raised hands now. So I would like to ask Lucia Vidovičová to ask her question. And please, when you are asking question, don't forget to unmute your mics.
Yeah. Hi, thank you very much for your presentation, Annemarie. It was very intriguing for me. And when I was looking at the diagrams you were showing, how the food kind of relates to each other, it immediately popped in my ahead the picture of the production line our Prime Minister ex-firm has, that it's kind of linked to each other from the seeds to the fields, to the machinery, to the shops, to the newspapers. And it's kind of everything is related. So I was just wondering if you can kind of elaborate how in your thinking, these superstructures of political ownership of these lines, for example, related to food, can actually influence the experience as such?
I don't know. I haven't studied that, to be honest. And it may be, of course, other people are working on that kind of thing. But I mean, there are all kinds of voices at the moment who say that we will relate differently to our food if we grow it ourselves. And that was then one of the solutions given or potential solutions given to the crisis in how the way we are eating is exhausting the soils for us. And that may be the case, but it's also deeply romantic, because as soon as you live with 100,000 people or let's in an urban setting, let alone with 15 million or so, it gets a bit complicated to do that. So I think there is there are all kinds of real problems of what are good ways of different human collectives to relate to food and how to orchestrate their eating. But my book is very weird in that it does unravel what eating is going on, but it doesn't give any answer that most of us would like about how to do this better. What I have been trying to do is learn from it for models of thinking. And what I have not been able to do is answer the questions as to how do we eat better. I don't know. I mean, I may have an idea here and there, but so do you. I mean, I haven't studied that. And I also think if you ask about the experience of eating, that of course is really interesting, because that's on the one hand, if we relate to the conversation we just had, totally in a body. It's sort of what happens on a bodily level, and therefore also for social science is not that easy to access and to study. But while at the same time, that is partly collectively structured. So as we know, if you eat something in childhood, you will likely to like it later on, etc., and so on. So it's both subjective, collective, different in different settings. It's amenable to change, etc., and so on. So there's a lot to unravel there, but I have no answers as to the policy questions. I mean, I don't want to pretend. I think it's part of working with relatively wild methods is to also be really modest in what you can and cannot answer. So I'm totally immodest, as you saw in my shifting around all kind of theoretical models. So that means I have to be a bit modest in what I think about how to solve the problems of the world. I don't know. Sorry.
Thank you. Dana Hradcová has the next question.
Thank you very much, Annemarie. I first have to check whether the connection is okay, because I'm struggling with it.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Excellent. So your W book, Wild and Weird, is really inspiring. If it's that what you were intended to do, I feel really inspired. And I would like to go back to the appreciation connected to knowing. You mentioned that with the first mouthfuls, the appreciation of food is actually decreasing. So, and you asked us whether we agreed. So I can agree that with the first experience of the taste and with the hunger slowly disappearing, my appreciation, like the bodily appreciation of the food, may decrease. But if I go also to your idea of the closeness as distance, when I value the work which is behind, the labor actually, the labor which is behind the food on my plate, I also feel that my appreciation for that food as it comes to my mind and emotions is actually increasing. So I got puzzled with this slide on where we are with knowing and appreciation if we can't try to deal with this well-known duality of body and mind. And I even don't know where the emotions belong into the scene at this moment. So how is it with the appreciation and its faces while eating?
Thank you for that. Well, in the book, I actually the short answer is that is exactly an empirical question. It can be different in different settings. In the book, I have an example of I use as a case a dinner I had with my daughter in a restaurant. I mean, you see, even if I have a dinner with my daughter, it doesn't escape. I've never free time. It's always research. But anyway, she was okay with me using that. She knows her mother. So what we had there is that she had a dessert that had a taste she had never tasted before. Her first mouthful she didn't like. She thought, what's this? And so I asked her, shall we shift dishes? Because if you don't like your dessert, that's a pity. But she took 2 or 3 further bites and then she said, I'm starting to warm for it. So that's also what can happen in eating. And what I noticed is that in the same, my dessert, which was a totally fine dessert, after 2 or 3 mouthfuls, I felt that I had eaten enough. This was a dinner in a restaurant. We had a first course, a second course. Now it was the dinner. I never eat that much. So, it can increase and decrease. So the liking. And as you said, if you think about labor behind food, that can increase your appreciation because you think about all these people who worked for you. Under some circumstances, it can also decrease your appreciation. Because if you would think about really bad circumstances of people who picked your tomatoes, for instance, you can start to feel guilty that you eat the tomatoes because there's all this underpaid labor invested in them. So the whole question is my concern is eating and sort of knowing and appreciating and eating go together in empirically complex ways. So that's a call for being specific and engaging in the research. And the call in my case is to think about knowing also in other cases, not as disentangled from appreciating, attending to appreciating when we attend to knowing. And taking knowing not as value-free or as potentially value-free, but attending how is in other cases of knowing, appreciation going along with it, either individual or collective appreciations, how are they entangled with knowing in practices. So it's more a call for further research and for researching knowing differently than that it closes us off. And as that also goes for mind-body distinctions, I would think that is really weird to think that there would be a mind-body distinction or that there wouldn't. In that might also in different empirical cases emerge as a distinction. Let's say if somebody's under really, really a lot of pain, they may try to train themselves, if people with chronic pain may try to train themselves to disembody their mind, so to speak, to not be in. While in other cases, it is while you're eating a nice peach, you may try to embody your mind. So this again is also partly things that are practiced and done differently. Yeah, does that relate to your question?
Yeah, great, thank you.
Okay, good luck.
Thanks a lot. Another question comes from Michala Piksova, please.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm just interested if perhaps you have been dealing with how the experience of eating is influenced by the contemporary planetary crisis. You have already touched the topic a little bit. You were saying that when it comes to food, we know how much soil is getting exhausted, but actually there is so much more that goes into food. it's not just the soil, it's not just the labor, it's also the energy that we produce. It's also the water that we need to produce food. And it's also, yeah, like it's just a lot of different factors that go into it. And now there's an increasing, yeah, I was going to say there's also a lot of waste, that we waste so much food. And it's only now that people have started to learn what that actually means, how that contributes to the planetary crisis. And yeah, I don't know. I just would like to know in what way you're dealing with this topic.
Yeah, my study in that case is not so much on the experience as on the practices. There's a slight difference with that.
No, I mean, okay, experience and how that, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but again, how to say that? There is in the field quite some research into that. For instance, on food waste, my former colleague Sebastian Abramson has written recently a really nice paper on how people try to not waste. So let me put it like that. I think as social scientists, I mean, we're eaters as well, of course, but as social scientists in these cases, we can go on to push how horrible it is, what is going on in lots of ways about eating. And one of the things with the team I worked with and what most of the people I worked with are going to do in their own site is not just to study the bad cases, but to study the promising situations. So Sebastian did work with households where people try to not waste food and to see how they do that and what kind of efforts go into that. And in all kind of ways, I think it's quite an interesting challenge for us as social scientists. We're really trained at critique, and there is endless stuff to critique. But what about trying to not fall into the slot of the critique and the criticism, but to see what attempts there are made and how they're studied. For instance, with a few people, we're studying wastewater treatment practices in the Netherlands. So instead of, again, there too, instead of saying, oh, wait a minute, the wastewater treatment practices are not perfect, because they are not. What about the people who are trying to improve them? What are they doing? Again, there, as soon as you start to do social science, I think it's really good to not generalize stuff, to see, and the so-called experience of people may be very different in different sites. Of course, it makes a lot of difference if you have hardly any income and are really glad that you can feed your children and or yourself, than if paying for your food is not your problem and you have other concerns. All these things make a huge empirical difference. So there's lots of empirical research to do, but part of, I think, my encouragement is to go for studying interesting, innovative, or maybe really old but re-innovative practices, and where people are trying to grapple with these things in always tiny but still good ways.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are already behind our time schedule. But I would like to ask Lucia Galčanová, if she's here, if we can use this time slot of 10 minutes to prolong our discussion, or if we should really close the official part now and close the stream and go into the more casual conversation. What do you think?
Thank you, Mika. Thank you, Annemarie, very much for the lecture. In 10 minutes, there are three other sessions starting, and I would really like to give also the attention and also send the audience there. So I think I can give us like 5 more minutes if there is any other question, if it's okay. And then I will ask the organizers to stop this Zoom, because we are going to use another Zoom links. But you're very much welcome, if you want to continue with Annemarie and with Michael, to join us in WonderMe that you've all received in the program. And Annemarie and Michael received it also in the email recently. And we can also follow the discussion there if you would like to do that. But let's have 5 more minutes for questions here together.
Good, thank you. That looks like the last question then. And this goes to Jitka Virtova.
And it seems to me, if you have to survive all these days of conference, you should take your tea or coffee or whatever now. Huh? Yeah. Good.
Yeah, so Jitka, please.
Okay, thank you very much for a minute for my question. And Mary, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a really quick question. Thank you for your understanding to Hannah Arendt's theory, because she placed the political in the world of agency, and it was impossible for her to see it in the world of labor. So my question is, where do you see the political in your case simply everywhere? That simply it can evolve everywhere, or it is purely empirical question, or can you see some pre-established domain for political in the eating case? Thank you.
Thank you, Jitka, for the question. I think that's an important question. I'm struggling always with that one, because there are 2 ways to go with this. A bit of me is inclined to think that it's good if we as researchers discover politicals where they so far haven't been recognized, to articulate. For instance, I mean, this has been recognized, but to take the example of the fish I gave. If some people do research and say fish is good for human health, and others do research and say fish is depleting the oceans, then both these things become political. What in the sense that how are we going to organize life? Or how are we organizing it, not just through our parliaments or other political sort of arrangements, but also through our eating fish or not eating fish. But of course, I mean, there's all kinds of things to say about the kind of way of how you set up that political without individualizing it, and without it becoming my responsibility to not deplete the oceans through my individual acts. I mean, that is really a trap there. But colleagues who are working on classic political institutions say, wait a minute, in society, it takes a lot of effort to make things political in the sense that they come to be acted upon in those kind of institutional settings. So they argue to reserve the word political for what happens in the official political settings, and to try to experiment with other terms for these different ways of world making that help to structure, or that through which we help to structure the world in our labor and in our doing. But so far I haven't found another term. So I'm on the side of keeping to call that political. And I'm really grateful for, let's say, my colleague Andrew Barry, who's always pushing on the other side. It's not necessarily bad to be incoherent. So let Andrew and others push the fact that it's really specific what can be politicized in an official way and what cannot. But it's, let me emphasize, but wait a minute, in labor and in materialities, they have their own kind of politics. So then I think as a social scientist, it may depend on the research you're engaged in, on what you want to do there, how you use your words. I do think words, theoretical terms are tools. So I do think it's maybe not necessarily to say this is political or this isn't, but what can I do with my research if I call it political, or if I don't call it political, what is the gain of that for the kind of things you want to particularly achieve with your own research practice? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, good luck.
So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Annemarie, for a wonderful talk full of really exotic and charming tastes, I think. And thanks to everybody who came and who've been with us. And I would like to invite everybody to come with us to WonderMe. You will find a link in the chat. So I think this is the time to close the first keynote of the conference and to move into the more informal setting.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all your attention and your questions. I really appreciate that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.